Hey everyone, this is Abdel. We'll just give people about a few more minutes to join in.
I see that Moore joined as well, and she also for some reason has my name.
That's true. Different picture though.
Yeah, but I am the real deal, I promise.
Here, I'll rename myself.
Yeah.
Identity theft 101.
Yeah, I'll open up my oh, I can't start my camera. I would have, but I cannot.
Yeah.
You have been promoted to co-host.
Wow, this is definitely my week. There we go.
All right.
Hello, everyone.
I'll see if I can start my camera here. I usually get a pretty bad light in my room here. So where are you all from? Are you Boston area, I assume?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
both.
Awesome. See, it's all dark in here. I look like a supervillain.
I could say something sarcastic about dirty laundry, but I won't.
I have no time. Sorry. I can put like the background that Zoom, has, but
oh, I have my regular Zoom party trick. Just a second. There we go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Visible.
Yeah, yesterday I was in all of our meetings. I was just a floating head. I was wearing like a green hoodie with my hat on and everything, like with the hoodie on. And for a whole day at work, I was a floating head.
There you go. I'm with the Simpsons today. I'm Bart for today. Hold on. There you go.
I do love The Simpsons. Definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, add some, fun. Add some fun to the Zoom meetings.
So glad Zoom decided to do that.
Wait, what about, I could do, where was it? I could do this, like that. Here we go.
There we go.
This is fine.
All right. I think it's safe to kick this thing off now. Yep. Okay. So I'm Abdel. I'm the president of CSNP, and today we're joined by Amit and Moore, who are really going to talk about the, I guess, the campaign against telecommunication providers. Myself, I didn't get a chance to read what the two of you are going to talk about, but I wonder if it's the same thing that's been going around. Anyways, I'm looking forward to this talk. So we're going to start with Amit. Amit is the VP Security and Strategy and Principal Researcher at Cybereason. And Moore is the VP of Global Security Practices, also at Cybereason. So with that to say, Amit, I'll go ahead and let you take lead and, go at it.
Thanks. I just got to figure out the screen sharing here because I got tons of stuff open. So give me just a quick second.
Sure.
I think I'll do this.
All right.
And what's going to happen if I'll hit present with presenter view. So can people see my screen?
I sure can.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, what did I do? Just a second. Let's put it on full screen. That's better, right?
Yep.
It's weird. I'm usually used to speak in a room full of people. And doing it in my home office is really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's kick it off. So thank you all for joining. It's really exciting and weird to do it from my house. I'm used to, as I said, we're used to do it like on stages. It's kind of strange. So let's hope for better days. We're going to talk about Operation Soft Cell, which is an investigation that we started doing almost 2 years ago now. And we made it public about a year ago. So we're not gonna talk about anything we haven't talked about yet. So if you read all the ridiculous amount of media coverage that was on about soft cell, you probably know what we're going to talk about. If it's the first time you're hearing about it, then you're actually in for a treat. This entire research and talk was about a 9-month-long research project, which took almost all of our time. And it was led by myself, by the lovely Moore Levy, and by Asaf Dahan, who is not presenting with us today because he lives in London and it's the middle of the night for him right now. So we'll do the obligatory "Who are we?" and we either Moore or I will present Asaf. So my name is Amit. I am, as was said, I'm the VP of Security Strategy, and I'm the Principal Security Researcher at Cybereason Nocturnus. I've been with Cybereason for the past almost 6 years. It's going to be 6 years in October. I started in Israel. I'm originally from Israel. That's why I have a weird name. And I started, I worked before Cybereason. I worked at one of the Israeli intelligence agencies doing exploit development and reverse engineering and all sorts of fun, offensive things. And I joined Cybereason in Israel, and then I moved to our HQ in Boston almost 4 years ago. And that's me. More, would you would you like to present Asaf?
Sure, why not? So Asaf, as Amit mentioned, is based out of London. He's leading our Nocturnus research team. Like many others in the Israeli cyber security companies and industry, Asaf is X8200 unit, been either Mossad or IDF, true. That's what the chat is saying.
I can't see the chat. I have the full screen going.
All right, so I'm reading it to you.
Oh, thanks.
So Asaf started his career in the cybersecurity world as more on the offensive side, but Asaf's expertise is mainly around malware analysis, reverse engineering, threat hunting, and threat intel. He's a really great guy, and I really recommend you reading a lot of his stuff. And he's also a close friend of mine and Amit's. Cool. So about me, my name is Mor Levy. I'm currently the VP of Global Security Practices at Cybereason, meaning that I'm managing the entire security services organization within Cybereason, which means all of our managed services, SOC, incident response, threat research, everything else. From my background, I'm more on the defensive side, also been in the IDF in one of the tech units. I worked for one of the big four as leading the incident response and forensics consultancy. And I'm at Cybereason for the past 5 years. So that's the long intro that we've had.
Yeah. And more because I have control of the slides, so just let me know when do you want me to click it to the next slide. So let's go over the agenda real quick. So we're going to talk about what exactly Operation Soft Cell is, or was, or maybe still is. We're gonna do an attack breakdown. We're gonna talk to you about all of the threat intelligence work that we did and how we actually reveal the entire operation. We're going to have some closing remarks, and hopefully we'll have time for questions if you may have any. So without further ado, let's kick it off. So what exactly is Operation Soft Cell? I always say, excuse me, when we were talking about Soft Cell at conferences, I was always saying if you were expecting a talk about the Euro synth duo from the 80s, Soft Cell, and their song Tainted Love, you are clearly in the wrong room. But I assume that you all read the blurb, so you know what we're going to talk about. And I'm also the one to blame for the name Soft Cell, which a lot of people did not understand, but hopefully by the end of this talk, you will. So Operation Soft Cell, as I said, I have a background. I used to work for an intelligence agency, and in the jargon that I'm used to from my previous life, Operation Soft Cell is what's called an access operation. An access operation is basically an espionage campaign that's meant to generate actionable intelligence about people, people of interest, through access to a network or a source. So in that case, Operation Soft Cell, the attackers were hacking a lot of cellular providers around the world. And there was actually an article pretty recently, like in the past couple of days, that researchers, if I'm not mistaken, from Symantec, or what's left of Symantec, found a similar campaign in some providers in Pakistan. So if you read the news in the past few days, this is going to maybe give you some more context. So when we're saying an access operation, it means that in order to get intelligence, in order to siphon data, you need to have an access to a source. So this is why we use the term access operation. Operation Soft Cell, as we found out when we were going through our investigation, we realized that excuse me, we realized it was a multi-year and a multiple waved attack. And every single TTP that we saw, and we will discuss the TTPs momentarily, we saw that every TTP that we found actually was tied to a Chinese nation-state threat group. When we were looking at this attack at the beginning, we weren't exactly sure what we were looking at, but as time went by, we realized this is an intelligence operation, this is an access operation, this wasn't someone hacking a company to get the payment data or personal information and credit cards and stuff. Like this was much worse than that. And obviously, when you are an attacker, especially when you're a nation state attacker, and you have access to a telco, to a cellular provider, you could also use your access to that provider to do some more things. For example, you could use the access that you have to the network. You could use the network that you're attacking as sort of like a trampoline into other networks that you want to attack. And if you are basically tunneling all of your connections through that cellular provider, it's very hard to understand where you're coming from. So this was another thing that the attackers did. And again, we'll talk about it. But let's talk about what was actually the target of the attack. Because when you are, when an attacker is this is my cat meowing here. I'm sorry, go away. When an attacker when attackers are breaching a cellular provider, as I said, they're not just doing it to get payment data. In that case, and this was the moment that we realized that this was actually an access operation, we saw that the attackers were after a very, very specific type of data, and that's the call detail records, or CDRs for short. CDR is metadata. It is data that is exchanged constantly between your phone and the network that your phone is connected to, the cellular network. That data, as I said, it's metadata. So what's in this data is mostly the date of a call, the time of a call, the duration of a call, the originating number, so who called, and the terminating number, so which number was called. The IMEI, which is the identifier of the device, of the phone itself that you have, and the cellular, the CI, the cell site identity number. So every cellular site, and by cellular site, I mean a cellular antenna, for example, that you have, like a big tower, or a small picocell or nanocell that you have in a shopping mall. If it's a cell site, doesn't matter its size, it has a CI. And the CI is something that's known. If you have the ID of a cell site, if you have the CI, you can know where is the physical location of this antenna. And if you take all of that data and combine it together, what you can basically get is a window into someone's life, because you can know who this person is talking to, who's talking to this person. You can even know who they're texting. Again, it's metadata, so you don't have the content of the text or the content of the call, like voice recordings, but you do have all the data around it. So for example, if you have my CDRs, you can know that I'm talking to more like 1 million times a day, because people at work drive us crazy. So you can know, in since now I'm working from home, but before that, you can know that my phone is connected to a cell site that's either next to my house or next to my work. And if I'm driving to work or taking the train to work in the morning, I am connecting to various different cell sites along the way. So if you have all of that information, you can know who I'm talking to, who's talking to me, what my day looks like, because you can actually track to which cell site I'm connecting. So you can track my physical location. So when attackers are getting access to this data, especially if it's a nation state sponsored attack, you know that what they're looking after here, what they're looking for here is data about people, about who they're talking to, about where they're going, about their location. And that is quite alarming. And once we saw that this is happening, we realized, okay, this isn't someone looking for money. This is actually some nation state attack trying to track some people around. And again, we will get to that as well. More, would you like to talk about what the impact of this thing could be?
Sure. So as Amit mentioned, this was a very long campaign that we've tracked. Like, it took us 9 months to investigate, and we've identified that the duration of the campaign was few years. And as for an impact, this campaign had an almost complete global impact. We found the attackers had access to telcos across the world, in Asia, in Europe, and in Africa. So many people that were exposed and many customers of those telcos that were exposed. And the impact of such hacking campaign on companies, it's huge. It caused business disruption because in one click of a button or a mouse, in that case, they can actually shut down cellular sites because they had the access if they wanted to. We're not saying that they did that, but they could have. There's also a huge operational cost to fix the IT infrastructure and the operational infrastructure of all of the antennas and all the network that is connecting between everything else, because everything is breached and compromised. So you need to change the entire IT security stack. Other than that, it's also that you have a foreign control within your critical infrastructure, which no one wants to admit that they are under such control from a foreign country or external country. And other than that, those foreign entities, that nation state in that case, had access to specific individuals, specific persons of interest that they wanted to track their metadata and calls and track their activity. It basically provide them a lot of information for espionage purposes, and eventually it just really useful when a nation state country has a specific targeted operation against a specific individual. And because we're talking about nation state threat actors, it's much more challenging to get rid of their persistence in that network. Can we click to the next slide, Amin?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll go through the attack breakdown. Basically, we said it's slow, and we'll explain the timeline of this attack. As I mentioned, it took us 9 months to investigate, but we actually identified that the duration of the attack was much longer than months. It was actually years. So can we go to the next slide?
Yep.
Perfect. So here we have like the beautiful animations that Google Slide allows us. But basically, from a timeline perspective, the attack was multi-wave attack, as we mentioned. So the first wave that we have identified was somewhere around 2018. And the activity that we have identified was something, nothing that we've never seen before, right? So the activities that we have identified were web shell activity, credential stealing. And based on that, we worked with the specific customer, the specific telco, to do containment actions and basically to stop the attack. So this was the first wave. As I mentioned, nothing here was very attributed to a specific threat actor, because the TTPs of web shell and credential stealing is something very common, and many attackers are using those methods in order to attack. So in the first wave, nothing special happens. But then the second wave happened 2 months after. In the second wave, we already seen that the attackers are adapting to our detection and response methods. So we've seen a modified version of the original web shell. There was some nuances that were supposed to avoid detection, but because the detection that we're doing is based on behavior and not necessarily on signatures, we still were able to identify the attackers coming in again. There was also additional credential stealing attempt that this time was blocked, but then also the attackers did some reconnaissance work. They scanned a little bit the network. They exfiltrated some of the data, some of the recon data that they have collected. And yet again, we did additional containment actions. Keep in mind, all the activities and the TTPs that we are describing here, nothing here is out of the ordinary or out of the normal or something that we've seen for the first time, right? So still no alarms that were ringing for us. But then third wave hit us, and this was after 3 months. Keep in mind, this is an investigation that at that point is going on for 5 months. In this third wave, we had yet another web shell attack. In this case, the attackers were able to bypass the detection because they learned how we are identifying things. We've also seen that they're doing some user enumeration activities as well as lateral movement. So between the second and the third wave, or let alone in the first wave, some of the credentials that they've already that were already stolen, now in the third wave they use that to do some lateral movement. They used hTran, which is a tool that Amit will talk about and explain. And there is a reason why I'm specifically mentioning this tool, because this was one of the pivotal moments in which we realized that we have something different here, and this is something much bigger than what we're thinking. We're also identified additional data exfiltration, and in there we already realized that something bad is going on. And yet again, we tried to do some more containment actions and remediation, like, reset passwords of the stolen credentials and the user, block access to the compromised web servers that the attackers came through. But unfortunately, there were too many holes in that network that the attackers could come through. And then, as I mentioned, we have realized in that third wave that this is something different. This is a pivotal moment for us, that something is going on, and we realized that the data that is exfiltrated is not credit card information or financial data. It's actually very specific data, CDR records. And then, yeah,
I always love it when we present this this deck. So once this red exclamation point pops up, more always said, and I'm kind of disappointed you didn't say it. So please say it. I like it when you say it.
This was the oh shit moment.
Yes, thank you.
There you go. And yeah, we just did this so many times. After 1 month, and yes, this was definitely the oh shit moment, because it was a meat discovery, and just before I'll talk about the fourth wave, but it was a meat discovery, and coming from where he came from, he knew what it means. He knew what this data means, and Amit, of course, you can chime in here, but oh shit moment, yes.
Yeah, as I said earlier, and as Mor mentioned as well, once we saw that the data was exfiltrated, was actually CDR records that were pulled from one of their databases. The moment I saw that, I said, okay, this is not like someone trying to do some sort of a fraud or steal money, because actually one of the servers that they were tunneling through in their environment was the server that kept all of the payment data, all of the credit card records, all of the personal information, all of the personal payment information. And they just went through that server. They didn't do anything. And when these attackers came in there, they knew exactly what they were looking for. They knew which servers they were targeting, and these were the servers that had the CDRs. Sorry, continue more.
Sure. So I'll just wrap it up. And just after 1 month after the third wave, when we thought that the attackers are already done, right? Because they got the CDR data, so what else do they want? We actually realized that the attackers are getting more persistent and getting additional foothold on the network, in which instead of every time to exploit some web shell and get into the network, at this point we realized that they actually have their own VPN access to the network. They actually had their own VPN client and a VPN server that they have connected to and configured the client within the telco IT environment to have access to their VPN server. So they had their own tunnel into the IT network of this company, which is, it's like mind-blowing. I don't know if you all understand or if you work as a security professionals for some companies, but to know that the attackers are able to bypass all of the security mechanisms that you have and basically have a direct tunnel into your network, it's pretty, like, I don't know, makes me feel bad. Anyway, they continue to do some more Active Directory enumeration in this environment, and just to have more and more foothold and persistence on the network. And actually, up until this day, we still think there's some evidences of activity in that network, but we'll talk about it later. I don't want to say too much teasers around here.
Yeah, so I'm also doing some of Asaf's slides because, as I said, he's not here. So it's kind of weird. It's like sort of like whose slide is it anyway? But I'll try. I'll do my best. So when we're presenting and when we're talking about attacks as big as this, we like to use the kill chain model, the attack life cycle, or the cyber kill chain model, which is a term that I personally loathe.
And or you can just say the MITRE attack framework.
Or the MITRE attack framework that everybody likes. So if we're looking at what we're seeing here, at this point, they were actually at the initial exploration and staging level, which is when we sort of started seeing this behavior. So as Moore mentioned, the attackers exploited a vulnerability in one of the internet-facing web servers that our customer, the telco, had. That web server was a Microsoft IIS web server, which was also unpatched. So they didn't really use any cool 0 days. They actually used some really old exploit because, you know, the server was just vulnerable and unpatched. So once the web server was exploited, the attackers uploaded a modified version of the China Chopper web shell. So the China Chopper web shell is a web shell that's infamous for its ties to various Chinese threat actors. So this was another indicator that we saw that it was a Chinese threat actor. But that modified version actually threw us off a little bit. Because it wasn't like the same China Chopper you see in every operation. It was slightly modified, but it was very easy to understand that it's actually the notorious China Chopper web shell. So once they had this web shell in place, they actually used that web server as sort of like a staging environment for all of their tools. So they set up this directory in one of the temporary folders on the machine, and they uploaded there a bunch of tools. Some of these tools were proprietary to them. Some of these tools were sort of open source tools that they bastardized and modified a little bit to avoid various detections. We'll talk about that as well. But this is the original foothold that they got into the organization, at least from what we saw. And we found a whole bunch of tools and a whole bunch of interesting evidence over there on that server. So once these tools were put in place, the attackers started scanning the network around. Basically, what they did is they opened a port scanner and they started scanning the network that the web server sees, because it was in the DMZ. So it had one leg connected to the internet and another leg inside their internal network. So if you run a scanner on this machine, you'd be able to see a whole bunch of other machines in their network. So what they did at this point is they had this port scanner, and they started scanning the machines that are visible or that were adjacent, so to say, to this web server. They found a bunch of Windows machines. So what they did, the web server was also a Windows machine. They dumped the credentials on the server using Mimikatz. And then what they did is they tried to use the credentials that they dumped, that they had just dumped from the web server, to authenticate to all of the other adjacent machines. And once they were able to connect to another machine, they did the same thing. They dumped the credential using a modified version of Mimikatz, scanned the network around them again, connected to the machines that they found, and basically repeated that whole process a bunch of times until they had enough access to the network. So when we were looking at it, and in some of those things, we were actually looking at it real time. Like we actually saw the attackers typing the commands. We saw that they were typing fast, and some of the commands were typed wrong. Like it was really interesting to see. And at least for me, it was interesting to see it from the other side. So some of those things we saw in real time was really interesting to see how efficient and how quick they were working once they had access. So we were talking about the China Chopper web shell. So what we see here is actually, so this is how our system, this is how our products. So if you'll ignore the code that you see here, if you'll ignore these two screenshots, this is actually a screenshot from the attack tree that our product displays. So you can see w3wp.exe, which is an IIS worker process. You can see that it's spawning a CMD prompt, which is kind of weird and should never ever happen. And if you see that thing going on, you should be very worried. And then you can see that this command prompt is also spawning a few other processes. So it spawned find.exe, and they were actually looking for certain files with it. It was spawning ipconfig because they wanted to see the IP address and the layout of the network. They were spawning netstat to see which other ports are listening and which other connections are established. And obviously, WHOAMI in order to see which user is running the IIS web server, or actually their web shell. Now, as for the China Chopper code, as I said, it was a modified version. So on the top with the white background, we can see a screenshot of the code from GitHub. So if you'll go to GitHub, you can actually find a lot of versions of China Chopper, but this is like the vanilla version, so to say. And you can see its code right here. And on the bottom, this screenshot is the modified version that we found at our customer. Now, what's blurred are things that are very indicative to our customer. And this is one of the things that were modified, but you could see that they actually tailored this tool, especially for the environment of our customer. But if you look at the code, you can see that it does the same thing. It's very similar, if not identical, other than these few changes. Another tool that they used is a modified version of NBTScan. So NBTScan is a tool that scans NetBIOS resources and shares, which is NetBIOS is a Windows protocol. So by using NBTScan, they could see which computers are adjacent to that web server that they were attacking. So as I said, they gained foothold using that web shell. They scanned the network using NBTScan. They dumped the creds. They connected to the machines that they dumped that they were scanning, and then they deployed NBTScan to these machines and did the same thing over and over and over again. That version, or that modified version of NBTScan, is highly associated with other Chinese threat groups such as APT10, APT1, APT27, and a few others. So now we're at the lateral movement stage. So as I said, they had a bunch of tools that they were using. So what we found was a modified version of Mimikatz, which I will talk about. They had a PowerShell version of Mimikatz, which again was modified in various ways. The PowerShell one was actually not very interesting. The Mimikatz, it was kind of a simple modification. I'll talk about that in a second. But what they also did is they were also dumping the SAM hives from the registry on these machines. So they pretty much had a bunch of credentials in various formats. So whether it was NTLM hashes they dumped using Mimikatz, or the SAM hives that they dumped from the registry, at the latest part of the attack, that was the same part. That was the same part that Moore talked about, where we found the VPN servers. At that point, they actually dumped the ntds.dit database from their Active Directory. So that means they basically had a copy of their entire Active Directory. So every username, every password or authentication token, they had all of the structure of their Active Directory. So once you have someone else's ntds.dit, that person is screwed. And obviously, they also laterally moved using WHOAMI and PSExec with the credentials that they dumped. So let's talk about the modified Mimikatz version for a second. So I actually reverse engineered this version, and when you run it, so when I downloaded it and when I started when I got it off of the environment, I mean, and I ran it in my computer, I thought I had a feeling that it was Mimikatz, so I called the file maybe Mimi. That's the name I gave it. But if you ever use Mimikatz, you know that you need to give it a bunch of command line arguments, either command line arguments, or you actually need to work with it interactively. Since they're running from a web shell, they don't want to do all of these things. Obviously, if you're running from a web shell, working interactively is kind of a pain, not always possible, because you're using HTTP post requests. And if you're using the command line, you need to pass a very long command line. And actually passing long command lines in web shells is kind of tricky, because sometimes you have some annoying HTTP encoding that gets in the way. So if you ever, if any of you ever worked on web exploitation, you know that HTTP kind of tends to get in the way, HTTP as in the HTTP protocol. So it's kind of annoying. So what they actually did is they took the source code of Mimikatz and they modified it in a way where they removed anything, they removed anything and everything they didn't need. So the only thing that they needed was to get the NTLM hash written to the standard output. So all the rest of the features that Mimikatz had are gone. So you can't, no dumping Kerberos tickets, no Kerberosting, none of those things. What it does, you run Mimikatz, it prints the SAM key and the sys key, it prints out the NTLM hashes of the current logged in users, and it exits. That's what it does. So that is the modification. They also removed and changed a bunch of strings, so various static analysis engines couldn't pick it up. Shameless product plug, our product picked it up. Hooray for us. As I also said, we identified the threat actor dumping specific Hives from the Windows registry. Obviously, and if you don't know, the SAM Hives contain Windows password hashes. So they had that as well. This is a screenshot from the product. These things are censored, but you can see that we detected that reg.exe, which is the registry editor, was actually attempting, excuse me, attempting to dump the credentials. As for the lateral movement, this was an interactive attack. An interactive attack means that someone at the moment of the attack is sitting somewhere in front of their machines and they're actually typing in commands. And as I said, we saw these commands. And these are some of the commands that we saw. And as you can see, excuse me. As you can see, they used a bunch of WHOAMI and PSExec tools, and they were exploiting various things in the network. They even at one point just stole a bunch of emails from the Exchange server that this company had. So they were also reading their emails. Another thing that you can see here, the S and E in these brackets, that is a very strong indicator for the usage of the China Chopper web shell. It appends these strings so that the attacker could see where the command begins and where it ends once it finishes executing. So using all of these things, they compromised a bunch of critical assets. So their production servers, their database servers, they had, as I said, full access to the domain controller. So they were actually, the attackers had better knowledge of the IT network of our customer and probably of the other companies that were hacked, which were not our customers. The attackers had better knowledge of the IT environment than the actual IT admins themselves. These were very, very uncomfortable conversations to have. So at this point, we're at the data collection and data exfiltration part of the attack. So once the attackers moved laterally and once they managed to compromise all of the critical assets they were after, they went all the way for the crown jewels. So they started collecting data and preparing it for exfiltration. So we actually saw them accessing, and that was the point where we realized this is a nation state sponsored attack and they are doing espionage, because we saw that they were accessing a specific Oracle database server, which held all of the CDRs from that specific region that they hacked into. We haven't mentioned that, but that customer that was attacked that we're talking about here, they're a cellular provider and they're one of the biggest providers in the world. They acquired multiple companies. They have operations in various countries on various continents, and this was only one region that they hacked into. And as you can see here in the command, what they did is they went to that server, they dumped all of those records, and the records that they dumped were actually, they didn't dump the entire database because it's ridiculous amounts of data. They dumped records, specific records about 20-something specific individuals. So when they were doing the select query from the database, they were doing select queries on specific records, on specific phone numbers. And once they extracted the data, they used the RAR, like the RAR archive, to put it in a password protected archive, and they gave it a name, and they gave it the date underscore cdr.csv. So we saw that and we're like, holy shit, like this is serious. This isn't someone just looking to have some fun. So another tool that they were using was poison ivy. And this picture is actually kind of funny. While we were researching this attack and while we were investigating, and one of the days we had nice weather, and my wife and I and Moore and her husband we're all of us good friends, and we went to this a lake near my house. So this is like, I don't know, like half a mile from my house. And as we're walking towards the lake, we're seeing the sign, "Caution, poison ivy." And I started laughing, and I took a picture of it because poison ivy is a well-known rat, remote access Trojan, that the attackers were using against our customer. And this is poison ivy. This is what it looks like on the attacker side. So poison ivy is what they used pretty much to do everything once they had access. So once they had access to a machine, they would deploy poison ivy and they could pretty much do whatever they want. And you can see in the screenshots that it has tons of features. So poison ivy is a well-known rat. If you have ever researched an attack by a Chinese threat actor, you've probably seen one version or another of poison ivy. Poison ivy has tons of features. You can upload files, download files, start processes, stop processes, get an interactive shell, dump passwords, get NTLM hashes, spy on wireless networks. It's a fully featured rat. And the way that they actually deployed poison ivy into that network, they actually bundled it with a signed and verified Samsung installer. And they loaded into the memory by using a method called DLL hijacking. So they would deploy that legitimate Samsung tool. So that tool was one of these tools where you can like configure your phone if it's connected via USB cable to your machine. So they used one of these Samsung tools, and the Samsung tool was signed. So if you look at that executable that you see running, if you look at it on disk, it's a legitimate Samsung application. It's signed and verified by Samsung. Everything is legit. But if you look at the memory of this application, if you dump the memory and you see actually what happens there, you understand that they actually loaded a malicious DLL because they exploited a vulnerability in this app. This application, this Samsung installer, is vulnerable to a DLL hijacking attack. And the combination of this of poison ivy and the signed Samsung application and the DLL hijacking with poison ivy is a very well-known APT10 tactic. So at this point, we were like, oh, wow, this is APT10. It's been a while since we've seen them. So this is what it looks like from a process hierarchy sort of view. So the application, the Samsung application, is called runhelp.exe. And it's actually an NSYS installer, a nullsoft installer. It's NSYS is a platform to create software installers. I'm sure you've seen it in legitimate applications. And once this installer runs, it actually extracts the Samsung application, which is that runhelp.exe file. And it also unpacks a DLL that's called ssmuidll.dll, which gets hijacked and injects the poison ivy stager code into the memory of a pre-configured process. So what they're doing is they're actually starting NSLOOKUP, which is a legitimate Windows application. But while they're starting it, they're stopping the execution and they're overriding the memory of NSLOOKUP. So what you see, if you look at the processes that you have running on your machine, you think that this is a process of like a legitimate NSLOOKUP running, but it's actually malware, because it's sort of like if you'll take a big loaf of bread and you'll empty all of the inside of the bread and you'll just shove something else in there. It's actually pretty delicious. But you want to do it with, like, I don't know, ground beef instead of malware. So now what we have is we have a legitimate Samsung application, which isn't a legitimate Samsung application, and it's running a legitimate Windows application, which isn't a legitimate Windows application, but this this allegedly legitimate Windows application hosts a malicious thread, which is the poison ivy malware. So it's sort of like a layered cake of evilness, if you will. Now, this was the interesting part. This was where you know, all of the alarms in my head started ringing. So what we're looking at here is a memory dump of that malicious poison ivy thread. And what we're looking at here is a debugger that I was debugging the malware step by step. So what we're actually seeing here in the memory, in the strings are blurred. What's blurred in red was domains related to the victim. So it was our customer's website address, a few of their internal IP addresses. So we're like, interesting. This is very targeted against our customer. We can see here the NS lookup, which is the process that they chose to masquerade as. And here in blue, what's blurred was the command and control IP address and host name that the threat actor was using. Now, these details would come in very handy in the future, as you'll see. The interesting thing here is because it's so highly targeted, if you have the hash, and this is why it's also blurred and we didn't share any IOCs, we have an NDA agreement with our customer. We can't share any information about them. So we couldn't share IOCs. This was also a problematic thing. But if you're running, and this is also encrypted, by the way, and what we see here in the debugger is actually the functionality of the malware decrypting all of those strings to the memory. So once you dump the memory, you can see the strings in the clear and they're not encrypted. Another tool that they use, and Moore mentioned that was hTran, or another name for this tool is the HUC Packet Transmit Tool. And hTran is a weird little tool that was written by Chinese hackers. Its source code is available on GitHub, and you'll see that in a second. And hTran is a tool that is used by attackers and some pen testers to hide their traffic. So or to tunnel various traffic through it. And this is actually the tool that the attackers use to move between various computers and to be undetected by various firewalls and web application firewalls and all these sorts of things. And they also used it as a way to access the operational network. So that's what Moore said earlier, that if the attackers wanted, they could have actually just shut down the network. They had access with that tool that they were using with hTran. So it was actually tunneling their traffic from one side of the network to the other. So if you look at it at the firewall, and even if you sniff the traffic, you can't really see what's going on because hTran has its own weird protocol that obfuscates everything. So at the beginning, I actually didn't know that what I was looking at was hTran. So this is a screenshot of me trying to run that tool and trying to play around with it and understand what it's doing. And you can see that the output is kind of weird. List P127, list OK, list P8080, list OK, WFC on 127. And when you're looking at it, I'm like, what is it doing? So I actually started, I started reverse engineering it. I think that, do we have this slide here? Is it hidden? No, we don't have it. But, excuse me. What I actually did is I started reverse engineering it manually, and like I had like IDA Pro open, and that's the screenshot I was missing. And it's like, okay, this thing is doing that, and this thing is doing that. And I was showing that to Asaf, and unfortunately Asaf isn't here. But one amazing thing about Asaf is a walking malware encyclopedia. I originally don't come from the world of malware analysis. I'm just a reverse engineer. So give me something that has some binary code in it, I'll probably know what it's doing. But I don't have the right context of like, oh, wow, this sequence of bytes means that it's this loader that was written by this Chinese dude. So this is like what Asaf is all about. And I started showing him some like screenshots from IDA Pro and like, look, this is doing that. This is opening a socket. This is doing this. And he's like, oh, that kind of looks like hTran. I'm like, what? And then he sends me a link to GitHub with like all of the source code. So, and that was after like 4 hours of me like reverse engineering something. And he was like, oh, that's hTran. Boom, gives me all the source code. So that was easy. So then we could understand what this tool was actually doing. And what the attackers were doing is, and I wish I had the screenshot here. One of the things that they did is they actually modified hTran and they changed a lot of its strings. So this was actually listening on port 127, listen okay. These were all initials of messages. So these strings, if you look at the original source code, they actually make sense. They're written in broken English, but they're in English. So let's talk about the threat intel, because as I said, we started by looking at what was going on at our customer, but we quickly found out that our customer was not the only cellular company that was attacked by this specific threat actor. So here's what we did. Since we had the address, obviously, of the command and control server, we started doing a lot of research around the IP addresses. And we started doing passive DNS research, which means that we look at an IP address and we see to which host name or host names, plural, it resolves to. And sometimes you can find connections between these host names. So in that case, we saw that the attackers had a non-attrib server in Hong Kong, and the IP address of that server, let's call it 1.2.3.4, was the same IP address was resolving to 3 different host names. So at this point, we knew that the attacker had, while they did have one actual server with one actual IP address, they had multiple host names. And we then discover that each host name that they had was targeting, or was actually, let's say not targeting, but crafted for a different company that they were attacking. So when we started looking at samples in VirusTotal and other threat intelligence resources with the IOCs that we've had, which are these host names, we found more samples. And when we did the same thing we did here, when we ran them and dumped the memory, we saw that here the domains that we found in the other versions were actually referring to other cellular companies. So that was another holy shit moment where we're looking at it and like, oh my God, this is not something that's only against our customer. Look, they're attacking another company in this country, and this country, and this country. And we found over 10 different companies being targeted with the same tools, with the same TTPs. So it was pretty crazy. And we found samples going all the way back to 2012. So here we are in the middle of 2019, realizing that what we're looking at is actually a campaign that's been running for 7 years. So these guys were in other people's network, stealing data about people, about their phones, without even touching the target's phones, because they were stealing metadata from the cellular provider for at least 7 years. This was insane. And when we looked at the infrastructure of all of these servers, we saw that they have a command and control infrastructure based either in China or in Chinese affiliated countries. So we found servers in China and in Hong Kong, which is China, and in Taiwan, which is not China, but China really wants you to think that it's China. And as I said, we found multiple companies in completely different regions targeted by the same thing. More, if you would like to take it over.
Sure. So as Amit mentioned,
just a second, I lost my speaker notes. So let me just start again with presenter view. Oh, Jesus Christ, Google. Never mind.
It's all right. So as Amit mentioned, it's actually been for a while. So we thought, initially that it's been for several months. But once we had the IP addresses and we had the domains and, the hunting begins. And then we realized that there are samples that exist in VirusTotal from 2012. And then we actually were able to create some sort of a timeline of samples from 2012 till 2019, and we're still tracking it. Actually, we're still, we have some hunting rules that we're waiting to get new samples if someone will upload them. And Amit can also mention some stuff around the infrastructure later. But basically, we realized that this is like a very long operation, and that actually helped us to understand why, or maybe improve our or prove our hypothesis regarding that the nation state threat actor is actually China, because if they're there for 7 years, we don't think it's a copycat or something like that. So that's actually helped us to understand that this is probably China. So going back to you, Amit.
Yeah. So let's talk about the attribution. But before I continue, are we okay on time? Because we started a bit late, and I see that it's already 9. I don't want to run over, so I just want to make sure we're okay on time, because I kind of lost track of it.
Yeah, if we can, maybe in the next 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think we have much left. Yeah, we have like a couple of slides left. We're almost done.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if we're looking at so attribution is actually attribution is kind of hard. So a lot of companies or researchers, you know, when they're seeing something, they say, oh, this is APT, whatever, and this is the Russians, or this is the Chinese, or this is the Israelis, or whatever. We're not big fans of this method, because many different threat actors use other threat actors' tools, because everything is available on the internet. A lot of things are open source. A lot of things were open sourced. A lot of things were disclosed by other security companies. So if you have access to VirusTotal and you know what you're doing, you can actually get access to a lot of tools that don't really belong to you. So at the beginning, we said that it was APT10, and we got some slack for it. But actually, we as this investigation went forward, we started saying, okay, this is either APT10 or Dragon OK or APT27, and then we said, okay, maybe it's another threat actor. But at the bottom line, it doesn't really matter, because we do know it's China, and these terms APT10, APT27, APT whatever, these are terms that were basically made up by other security companies for various reasons. But I remember, like in my previous life, one of our tools got exposed, or actually a few of our tools got exposed at one point, and some companies said that these tools belong to 4 different groups, but it was actually the same exact person operating all of them. So I'm not a fan of like a bold, blatant attribution. So because it's important to say that there's always a chance that this is actually a copycat. But we're looking at the IOCs, we're looking for more samples, we're looking at the samples that we found and comparing it to known data about threat actors. We're building a behavioral profile and looking at the operational activity, and then we come up with the suspects. So this is how we do it. We don't go out straight away and say, oh, this is, I don't know, bored panda or sexually aroused giraffe or APT27 or whatever threat actor name you may choose. So we actually said it is China. Like, we know it's China. We don't really care which exact group within China, but it is China. And we actually, so as I said earlier, this entire research got a lot of attention last year. And just a couple of weeks after we published our research, Reuters published that. Oh, I have a poll here. Reuters published that, and they actually found, or they think, that Operation Soft Cell was an operation that the China did in order to track Uyghur, the Uyghur community that's traveling outside of China. So Uyghur is a community of people that live in China, and they're being abused by the regime. They're being put in camps. They're being spied on. They're being sent to re-education camps. It's really, really, it's horrible stuff. It's like human rights stuff. And Jack Stubbs from Reuters believes that Operation Soft Cell was actually related to this. Again, we don't really know. But China actually responded, which was really funny. So after one of a reporter from CNET, Alfred Eng, wrote an article about Operation Soft Cell, and he actually managed to get a response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson in San Francisco, I think. And he said that China firmly opposes, I can't read it without laughing. China firmly opposes cyber attacks using the nation, using the nation's infrastructure, and denied involvement with the hacks. Second, with the cyberspace being a highly virtual one filled with multiple actors whose behaviors are difficult to trace, one should present abundant evidence when investigating and determining the future of a cyberspace activity. The Chinese embassy said in an email, making groundless accusations are neither professional nor responsible. Okay, so funny. So some closing remarks. So the response of the telcos that we talked to was actually pretty horrible. So as I said, one telco was our customer, but there were many other telcos that were not our customers. Obviously, while we did not share IOCs with the public, we did share IOCs and information with all the telcos that were attacked. We even someone from our company even spoke at the GSMA forum, which is a forum that have executives from the leading 25, from the biggest 25 telcos in the world. So we shared all of the information that we can share without voiding any, without violating any agreement with anyone, with all the people that we could. But if someone was attacked by this group, we gave them all of the IOCs, even though they're not our customers. All of them completely ignored us. Completely ignored us. Some of them even screamed at me, and I had a late night conversation. It was 4 a.m. in Boston, but it was a company on the other side of the world that got hacked. And one person from their either from their C-suite executives or like from their board, I can't remember, he started screaming at me for saying that this is a nation state sponsored attack. And I said, why are you screaming at me? I mean, look at all the evidence. I'm a researcher. What I do is research stuff. This is my opinion. And he says, well, if you're saying that a breach is a nation state sponsored attack, our cyber insurance policy will define it as an act of war, and act of wars are not covered. So they did not want this thing to be public because they didn't want to spend the money on fixing these issues. They wanted the insurance to pay for it, but the insurance won't pay because it's an act of war. So all of those people are completely ignoring the problem, and these threat actors are still in there, believe it or not. This is what I said about the IOCs. We could not share the IOCs. We got a lot of shit for it, for not sharing those IOCs. But as I said, our report that we wrote, which is available on the Cybereason blog, if you'll go to Cybereason, look for operations officer, you'll find it. It is super detailed, and it has all of the behavioral data that you need in order to find this attack. Either way, someone in Twitter, just for likes, posted a bunch of IOCs that we didn't want to publish, and the attackers took down all of their infrastructure. So thank you very much, someone very senior from a very big security company. And this is pretty funny, and I'm almost done. This is pretty funny because this is a cartoon. This is a comic strip that was made by Robert M. Lee from Dragos, about this whole thing. He did it without mentioning us, but our report, as I said, it had every detail, every behavioral detail and indicator you need. It just didn't have hashes and IP addresses. So if you read a report and you know what you're doing, you can find this attack. But everybody gave us so much trouble and so much shit for not posting the actual IOCs. So he made this strip, and I found it really amusing, and and we decided to include it in the presentation. So I was jumping a bit because of lack of time. If we have time for question, you tell me if we have time for questions, and if we don't have time for questions, then we're done. So
absolutely, we have time for questions. Yeah, let's go ahead and leave the floor open for questions. And I know Zoom has a Q&A feature, so feel free to use that. Or
yeah, I'm trying to find my Zoom window.
Yeah.
oh, there it is. It's on my other monitor. Okay.
Yeah.
Q&A. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen.
All right.
And where is the Q&A button here? No questions right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a question was asked earlier though, and I guess this was in the middle of the presentation. Someone says, so you were unable to determine how they penetrated repeatedly?
No, we did. So as I said, as I think Moore said that,
yeah.
they were constantly abusing this web server, probably for years. because it started before we started monitoring this environment. And they at one point they even had VPN access that they set up for themselves, so they could come in and go as they're pleased using a VPN installed on one of their less active servers. So that's how they got in.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well, it does not look like this.
I see. There's some more questions in the chat.
Oh, was there?
Yeah. Hi, Amit. You shared that VirusTotal was used to identify other telcos targeted in the same way. Was this uncovered following an upload of the malware? So I don't really know who uploaded the malware, and this is a whole. This actually made us develop our own capability, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But as I said, VirusTotal itself was not used to identify the other telcos, because you still had to get the sample, get it to run, and then reverse engineer it. Getting these samples to run is kind of tricky. So until now, I have a bunch of samples that I can't get running. If you're following me on Twitter and you see me tweeting about, oh, I spent all day manually patching malwares and they crash and everything sucks, this is me being frustrated about not being able to run these samples, not being able to get them to run over a year after finding them. But even though once you have the sample, you have to get it to run, and then you have to dump the memory and reverse engineer everything. So it's not straightforward. That's why it also took us months. It's a very complicated operation. As for was it uncovered following an upload of the malware? So obviously yes, because the malware was on VirusTotal, and that's where we got it from. The stuff, again, the samples that we didn't pull out of our customer's environment, because obviously we have access to that. VirusTotal gives every submission, VirusTotal gives it a submitter ID. So if you have access, I should have an open tab with an example of it. So yeah, let me share my screen again. So if I'll share my screen real quick, we can see that everything that's uploaded to VirusTotal gets a submitter ID, which is this thing right here. Now that submitter ID doesn't really mean anything, and you can't actually even use it as a search modifier. So you can't go to VirusTotal and say, give me all of the files that this submitter ID uploaded. You can't do that. We actually asked that from VirusTotal because we back then we found what we believed to be the submitter ID of the attackers themselves. And we reached out to VirusTotal and we said, hey, we're researching this insane state-sponsored attack. If you could please help us with finding some samples and give us what this submitter ID was uploaded. VirusTotal told us no. So we developed our own ability to do that search based on our own unique in-house capabilities. So now we can do that. I see that there's a question here in the Q&A window. So the attackers packed up and left after the IOCs were publicized. Yes and no. They did. Oh, More, you want to answer that?
No, go ahead.
Sorry. So once the IOCs were published by a specific person from a big company who did that for nothing but likes on Twitter, and this is me being very aggressive, or active aggressive. Within, I think, 2 days, all of these servers were taken down, the host names were taken down, the entire infrastructure were taken down. These samples of poison ivy don't work anymore. But I do believe, because there are some indicators that we're working with this customer, there are indicators that we found that the attackers came back with completely different and never seen before tools that they wrote especially for that operation. They completely changed their exfiltration methods. This is something we're still looking into, and because of how new and stealthy these tools are, we can't really reveal much as of right now, but we are tracking it. That's what I can say. And are there any more questions? I'm looking at the chat. You tell me.
Excellent presentation. Thank you. Oh, what could have helped prevent this incident from being so prolonged in the environment, in that environment?
I'm sorry, where is this question?
In the chat.
The chat. Oh,
In the
yeah, it says,
chat.
what could have helped prevent this incident from being so prolonged in that environment?
Have people patch their shit?
Yeah.
It's you know, it's a complicated, it's not a complicated question, but the answer is complicated because on one hand, we have a network that wasn't really fully patched. We have a problem with an industry that is very dependent on cyber insurance, and they don't want to spend a dime on fixing those things. So they're looking for their cyber insurance to fix it, but then they can't use they can't file a claim for the cyber insurance because the cyber insurance won't pay because it's an act of war. So it could have been prevented by patching. It could have been prevented by fixing the problems, finding the root cause, finding all of the implants in the network. We were also very limited with what we could do with this customer because it really depends. Some customers, our contract with them says, you do everything, you drive the bus for us, here's the keys, you do the thing, you tell us what to do. Some customers like this one is like, yeah, you will advise us, and you know, if we feel like it, will do something. So with this specific case, it's very frustrating because we're contacting them until this very day. We're contacting them and we're telling them, listen, like you're still owned, like these guys are still in there, like there's data going out, and they're like, okay, thanks. So
that's good. Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Looks like there's 2 more questions, and what will answer this question? If people don't mind taking the poll, that would be fantastic.
There's another question here. Would you like us to answer it? I mean, you tell us when to wrap up.
Yeah, let's answer these last 2 questions.
Okay, More, I think this is actually a good one for you. Did you find any distraction methods deployed after the 3rd wave by the attackers to redirect your effort while they attacked other systems?
Yeah, so first of all, this was a pretty big IT environment, several tens of thousands of endpoints and servers. And in this environment, there were many other different infections, commodity malware, unwanted programs, a lot of stuff over there. But we haven't seen anything that the attackers used as a smokescreen in order to distract our efforts from the investigation, because their behavior and TTPs were very clear of how they're operating, and the other tools or infections that we've seen in that environment were different. You know, whenever it is commodity malware or anything like that, it's pretty different than when you see the full attack phases and lateral movement and everything else. So to your question, there were no any smoke screens.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another question from Dan Langston. I answered it in the Q&A. In the Q&A, I typed the answer to this question while Moore was talking.
Fantastic. I don't think there's any other questions out there, is there? Let's see. So in the Q&A, I see that someone said, how did they get in again? Still on patch Windows servers?
Yeah, we just answered that a moment ago.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Emmett. Thank you, Moore. This was very informative. Thank you for coming on our platform. Hoping to see you on here again.
Yeah, hoping to do it again in person.
Yes.
Once the plague is over. Yeah. If you're looking for more information, by the way, about Softcell or about some more things that we're doing at the Nocturnus team at Cybereason, you can visit our blog. It's cybereason.com/blog, and you can see, like, in the menu there's Nocturnus. You can follow us on Twitter at Nocturnus for the research account. Or you can follow me for various malware stuff and mostly shit posting at 0xAmit, AMIT. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out either via LinkedIn. Oh yeah, someone just posted the link. And thank you very much, everyone, for having us. This is really cool. I hope to do it again sometime soon and in person, hopefully. So
Same.
thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.